trying to decide what to do with my water. I'll knock it down. I was at a church in Kansas. Was it Kansas? Yeah, Kansas. They had this pulpit. I'm going to make a suggestion. They had this pulpit that had a cup holder. That's awesome. You know what I mean? And I asked them about it. I said, so who puts a cup holder on their pulpit? They're like, well, we do. I said, that's awesome. I said, the pastor wanted someplace to put his drink all the time. Please keep that phrase in context. Our drinking pastor needs a cup holder. That's just funny right there. So anyway, I'm going to set it down. Dennis, here's another loaded question. Do you drink while you preach? You don't drink? Oh, okay. All right. You're one of those Baptist Nazarenes, aren't you? Did you have a good day? It was beautiful out, wasn't it? Man, it was just so awesome. Oh, it's just really, really good. I had a good morning and did some stuff around the hotel and talked to the ladies at the hotel, talked to them. I have to tell you the story. I had a spider in my bathroom yesterday. And here's how I found out that it was there. I was in the shower, and I looked in the shower curtain, and the shadow was on the other side. So like an idiot, I'm like, that's a spider. And so I was dumb, so I flicked it. And so I thought, I flicked it, so I'll just pull the curtain back and kill it. Well, when you flick it, it's gone, right? It's like, oh, great. So the shower's running, and I'm trying to look for this spider in my bathroom. Because I'm not going to let him live. I don't know, maybe you should let him live. I just don't. So I found him. You can only hide for so long, and it's a small bathroom. So anyway. All right, I got some chapstick. I'm going to have him deliver some right here. There you go. These boys over here seem to think that they're my fan club, but I know they just want me for my chapstick. Yeah. You know what? Listen, I'm going to throw it right there. If you can get it, push a couple of them down if you need to. The young man with the Broncos shirt, I'm sorry. I can't do that. I can't do that. Yeah, we've neglected this whole side. Sam, I'll hook you up, brother, okay? Not right now, but I'll hook you up later, okay? This young lady has an iPad. She deserves a tube of chapstick. Oh. You're welcome. Thank you. All right. It's awesome. I went to that Walmart, that little Walmart market thing. What's that called? Is that called? Okay, just one person tell me. What is it? Neighborhood market? Yeah. Have you? So evidently you've been in there. That is nice. That is nice. I don't know what it is about me going in there, but they were able to identify that I was not from here. Yes. I certainly didn't tell them I knew Kevin. That'd have got me thrown out. So I was walking around the grocery store on a phone call. Like I was on talking to somebody. I think that's what threw me. Like I wasn't really grocery shopping. But I walked around the whole thing while I was on the phone, and I got a good tour of the place. That's nice. I mean, they got a lot of cool stuff in there, like groceries and... Years ago, when I was in high school, I was in a band. I know. And, of course, I think everybody was in a band in the 80s. So years ago, I was in a band, and I'm a freshman year in high school, and I used to wear my sunglasses all the time because that's how people could tell you're in a band in the 80s, right? If you couldn't tell them, or if you had a mullet. If you had a mullet and sunglasses, they knew. And so me and my band members, one day after school, we were going somewhere, and I was in the back seat. My brother, who was the lead singer of our band, he was in the front seat. And we got into an accident, smacked into the back end of this car. And so I was in the back seat, and my face hit the back of the front seat. And those sunglasses smashed in my face, literally. So like my head went back, we stopped, We're all getting out of the vehicle. I'm like holding my nose, and my brother's looking at me. He goes like, hurry up, get out of the car. I said, I think my nose is broken. So I had my hands over my face. He said, my brother's not filled with compassion. He's like, you're all right. You're fine. Just get out. I'm like, no, I think it's broken. I went like that, and blood just went everywhere. And he's like, ah! He goes, I think your nose is broken. We didn't have this phrase back then, but it would have been, thanks, Captain Obvious. And I was like, yeah, I think something's wrong. So the ambulance came. I remember they put me in the ambulance, and they're looking at it, and they're like, yeah, we think it's broken. I'm like, oh, man. So I go to the hospital. I had never had a broken nose before. I don't know what they do for broken noses, right? So they took an x-ray. The doctor come in, and he said, yeah, he goes, your nose is broken. I said, all right. When are they going to put the cast on? And he's just like looking at me. He's like, what? I said, when are they going to put the cast on? How long do I have to have it on? He's like, they don't put a cast on your nose for a broken nose. I'm like, whew, right? But they might as well, because the contraption they put on there, you know what I mean? I would have rather had a cast. Anyway, so my nose is broke. He said, just be careful. Don't try to hurt it again. I said, well, I didn't try to hurt it this time. You know what I mean? So I remember one night I was in the basement of our house, and I was messing with my drums, and I had this Stanley screwdriver. You remember the Stanley commercials? Stanley, we want to help you do things. I was the only one that watched TV in the 70s? Okay, thank you. All right. And what was it? They were 100% guaranteed, right? They would never break. That's a lie from Satan. So I had this screwdriver, and I was prying with it, right? And I was just pushing really hard, and all of a sudden I heard this ping. And I look, and the tip of that screwdriver broke off, and it was floating in the air. And I watched it, and it came right there and stuck in my nose. My broken nose. Have you ever had one of those painful experiences that you yell so much that you lose oxygen, and you quit yelling, and then you yell again once you get oxygen? It's one of those things that's like, ah! Ah! I forgot, I don't know if I mentioned this or not. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. So my mom comes rushing down, and when she comes down, at that moment, what she says makes me realize where my brother inherited all the compassion that was in his body. She looked at me, and I looked at her. She looked at me, and she said, get that screwdriver out of your nose and get to bed! I was so stunned. I just literally did what she said. I took the screwdriver out and went to bed. What else are you going to do if, you can't even get sympathy from your mother, for crying out loud? In that moment, you know what I really wanted? A couple things I wanted. I wanted to be held. I wanted my mom to hold me, and she went to bed. And I wanted to be healed, right? You ever been there? You ever been in one of those moments where life is so painful that those are the two things you want? You want someone to uphold you or hold you, and you want healing of whatever it is that's going on. I was a youth pastor at a Wesleyan church for a number of years, and there's a young man in our youth group. His name was Judah. And Judah was probably one of the most talented young men I've ever come across. He's a saxophone player. He was a very, very gifted musician. Good kid all the way around. His parents called me one day, and they said, hey, listen, we'd like for you to talk to Judah. Just some things going on. He's not acting normal, and we're really concerned about him. So I sat down and had a conversation with him, and it was not a good conversation. I could tell in our conversation some of the things he was saying, and he was staying up really late. He was going 24-hour periods without sleeping. His eating was erratic. His temperament had really just changed. They're very concerned. So it was a Wednesday night, typical youth service, and Judah was in the back of the youth room there, and in the middle of me preaching, he just stood up and put his fist through one of the walls in the back, and then walked out. And so I stopped the service. I followed him out. His parents ended up taking him to the hospital that night, and he had broken, I think, several bones, if not all the bones, in his hand. And then the next morning, his dad called me, and he said that Judah had been diagnosed with being bipolar. It was the first time I had ever heard that term. So I remember that day going up there to see him. I was with the senior pastor was with me, and we walked into this room where Judah was, and there was just a bed, there was just a side table, and that was basically all that was in the room. And I remember sitting next to him, and there's just this glazed look on his face. And I remember thinking, man, what he needs is to be held and to be healed. There's a young man that was in my youth group that actually followed me to two different youth groups. I was a youth pastor at a Nazarene church for a while, and then I was a youth pastor at this Wesleyan church. And this young man named Daniel literally went from that youth group to the new youth group that I was at. And man, he came from a very rough home, and I was consistently trying to share Jesus with him. You know, there's a lot of things that was going on in Daniel's life, and there's a lot of things that were wrong in Daniel's life. And I could never convince him of that, that Jesus loved him. It seemed like he would get real close. And then there's a lot of things. There's a lot of suicide attempts, a lot of drug abuse, a lot of different things going on in his life. And man, it's just one of those kids I could not reach. He graduated high school and went into the Marines. I remember he'd only been in for a little bit, and he got kicked out. He was dealing drugs and using drugs. And I remember when he got kicked out, he called me, and he said, he goes, I'm coming back home. He said, but, I don't really know what I'm going to do, where I'm going to go. At that point, he was 20 years old. I was down in Oklahoma doing an event. I was getting ready to leave the hotel. The pastor was coming to pick me up. My wife called my room, and she said, Jim, I don't know how to tell you this. She said, but 5 o'clock this morning, she said, Daniel laid himself across the railroad tracks out by his house and committed suicide. And I thought, that young man, the nightmarish life he led. And then all he really needed to know was that Jesus was there, right? That Jesus could hold him, that Jesus could heal him. Whatever it was going on. And I think that message is for you and I today as well, is that we can be healed and we can be held by Christ if we allow him. The best example of this, I think, is the story of Jairus' daughter. And in my opinion, there are three things that we can learn from Jairus' daughter from this story. So Jairus was a religious leader, somehow connected with the temple, high up from what we understand. His daughter was dying, and he sought out Jesus. This is the first lesson we can learn from Jairus. Lesson number one, Jairus knew who to turn to for healing. He didn't run down a list of a lot of different options that he may have, but by the time we get to this spot in the story in Mark chapter 5, we realize that he was going to Jesus. Either he heard about Jesus, knew about Jesus, but something in his head or his heart said, Jesus is the answer. And he knew who to turn to. And that's the question I want to ask you tonight. Is that what your heart and your head tells you? I mean, we live in a world that offers so many options to fix what's wrong with us. And I think because of that noise, a lot of times, even people who follow Christ don't choose Jesus first. Mark chapter 5, verse 22 says this. It says, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. My dad died when I was 12 years old. And I had never experimented with drugs. I'd never done drugs. I'd never done alcohol until that moment. And I had never experienced death like that. I'd never had a close family member die, a grandparent die, a friend. I mean, I just did. The very first funeral I went to was my dad's. And I remember just not knowing how to cope. I remember thinking to myself, what do I do with this grief? I didn't know how to handle it. And so some friends introduced me to alcohol. And I began to abuse it on a regular basis, and some friends introduced me to drugs, and it seemed like that helped. Here's what I found out, looking back now at those times, here's what I found out, is that I felt different, But after all that wore off, I didn't feel any better. Different, not better. And see, I think there are people within the church, I think there are people who follow Christ, who grab other things. When it comes to healing, when it comes to restoration, when it comes to the pain in their life, maybe it's not as drastic as drugs or alcohol. Maybe it's prescription drugs. Maybe it's mindlessly playing video games hours on end. Maybe you shop. Maybe you look somewhere else. Maybe it's some other kind of habit, some other kind of addiction that you look to. And it's a short-term fix. And you feel different. Not better. We watch a lot of reality television shows at my house. Those are actually there's two categories of television in our house. Reality television shows and sporting events. And sometimes the line gets blurred. Sometimes sporting events become very drama, right? A lot of drama. And so we started watching this show a while back called Extreme Couponing. Anybody ever seen this show? This is a crazy show. This is a crazy, crazy show. I've watched it, and I don't understand it. You know what I mean? I'm trying to. I don't want to offend anybody. Like, if you're an extreme couponer here, we'll talk after service, and maybe there's a couple coupons you can give me. But anyway, so this one show I was watching, Extreme Couponing, this lady was on there, and she was going to show her mom how to extreme coupon. And they're sitting at the table, and they've got all these coupons laid out. And she's like, so this is what you do, this is what you do. And then all of a sudden, they're just like, I'm hungry. Or their mom's like, I'm hungry. Let's go get something lunch. Let's go get something to eat. And so they leave. And I'm thinking to myself, this is ridiculous. They go out to eat. She has a year's supply of macaroni and cheese in her garage, and they go out to eat. What? And then, this tells you right now that reality TV is not reality. It's scripted and staged. They're at the restaurant, and she doesn't even use a coupon at the restaurant. I'm like, extreme schmeem. You kidding me? You're not extreme couponer. And so they're talking to the husband. And the husband says, so what do you think about extreme couponers? And what do you think about your wife being an extreme couponer? And now here's what I don't like about the show is a lot of times what the ladies do, and there's guys who are extreme couponers too. The ladies, what they do is they take up their husband's garages and sheds and stuff. No. No. No, there's 3 places that I own in my house. Just 3. The garage, the bathroom, right? Certain sections of it, I should say. And then the basement, the man room. Don't tell me how to decorate it. Don't come down there and make suggestions. Don't tell me that it smells funny when you come down. I don't care. All right? I like the fresh smell of Steak and Shake. And little chili mac smell can get you through a football game. I'm just telling you right now. So and I'm thinking, and these guys give up their garages, and I'm like, what in the world? And so they're asking this guy, how do you feel about it? I'm thinking, I know how I would feel. And he said, before she was extreme couponing, he said she was spending $1,000 a month on clothes. That's $12,000 a year for those of you that are currently in Common Core math. That's a lot of money. And here, because I'm weird like this, here's the first thought I had when I heard that was this. What is she overcompensating for? I'm not saying that she has to, but I think maybe a lot of us do. We get involved and we do things. It's like, what are we trying to cover up? What are we trying to heal ourselves? That we should be taken to Jesus. And I know this, trust me, I know that there has been times, I've experienced this firsthand. There have been times when I have taken things to Jesus and I've prayed about maybe a physical, spiritual need, and it just doesn't seem like he answers it. And so then I'm a little gun shy to bring it back to him. And to me, I think that is a tool of Satan. Because if he can get you to quit talking to God, the best thing that he can do to any of us, or the worst thing, in his mind probably the best thing, is to isolate us. And I think that's how these things begin to creep up in our lives, is when we get isolated. The second lesson is this. Jairus believed in God's timing. Mark 5:35 and 36. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, I love this, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Wow. Don't be afraid, just believe. It's funny how Jesus is busy. All this stuff is going on, right? We know he's the Son of God. He can certainly multitask. He's in the middle of this. These guys come up to Jairus and like, "Here's the bad news, dude. She's dead. Let's just forget about it. Let's go back and have the funeral. Let's just get this over with." And in the middle of that, Jesus says this, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." Those times when we're anxiously waiting for God to intervene, when we want him to move, man, that is a good word tonight. Don't be afraid, just believe. Several years ago, I guess it's been a couple years ago, this may have started 2 years ago when I was here, matter of fact. I don't know if I've shared this story with you. If I have, just act like I haven't. My oldest son, Tyler, started developing really bad migraine headaches. We couldn't figure it out. And so we took him to all these different doctors, right? And I mean, we took him to 7 different specialists. And as a parent, the first thing you think of when you hear, a headache or migraine, you think, "Oh man, tumor." I mean, we just go immediately to the worst thing, right? You're just like, "I hope it's not this or that." And you go down the list. And it was none of those things. They could not figure it out. And I was so frustrated with God. I mean, my son would wake up with a migraine and have it all day. There were times where in the middle of the day he would call us and he'd say, "Hey, come pick me up." He said, "I can't make it through the day." And then he'd go to bed at night with the migraine. And he'd wake up, for days it just would never go away. He could take pills and it would lessen the pain, but it never went away. And I said, "God," "you could take it away. Really, God, you could, boom, like that, you could do it. Or you could give us the pill. We've been to 7 doctors. Surely we can find somebody who knows the right prescription here. Or maybe we just haven't. Maybe we need to go to the 8th doctor. So tell us who the 8th doctor is." I was so frustrated. Then I remember one night we were praying as a family. We always pray together before we go to bed, before the boys go to bed. And it was Tyler's turn to pray, and I remember listening to him. He prayed this prayer: "God, help us to trust even when we don't know why or what you are doing." Don't be afraid. Just believe. See, smack dab in the middle of Mark chapter 5 in this story is another healing story. Right in the middle of the story of Jairus is the story of the woman who could not stop the bleeding. Interesting, right? Interesting how this all plays out. Jairus has come to get Jesus. In the middle of Jesus, I would assume, maybe going to Jairus' house. And we don't know for sure that he was on his way to Jairus' house, what he was doing. But it sounded like that could have been happening. Right? Jairus got his attention. Jesus seems to be moving towards Jairus, going to Jairus' house. In the middle of this lady, this woman, reaches up, touches Jesus. Jesus goes, "Wow, some power's gone out of me." He has this conversation. Can you imagine Jairus sitting there just like, "Dude, I saw Jesus first." You know what I mean? Wait in line. We have numbers at our post office. I don't know if they have that here, but we have numbers at our post office, right? You pull a number, right? And then they have the number on the wall and they're clicking through it. If you ever pulled the number, you're like 81 and they're like at 79, you're like, "Oh man, that's great." And then they go 80 and then they jump to 82 and you're like, "Whoa." Maybe it's just me. Maybe some people in my post office don't like me, but I've been there where they've skipped over me and I'm just like, 81! You know? And sometimes those people they don't have good temperaments. I don't want to bash anybody, but sometimes they're not nice. But do you ever get skipped over, right? Or you ever been standing in line and someone jumps in front of you, right? And they expect you to just excuse them. Here's what I love, is when you get in a long line and people get in line and they save a space for someone else. Oh, don't you love that? You're like, oh yeah, where is that? Where is that in the unwritten rules of line standing? How? Don't you? Because you think the line is much smaller, and you're excited. You're like, we're almost in the concert, and then 9 people. You couldn't show up when they were here? I love it at Cardinals games, right? You go to a Cardinal game, you're sitting there, there's no seats around you. You're like, oh, you're stretching out. And people show up in the 4th inning. The 4th inning. The first proper question is this: are you Cub fans? Because they can show up late to games. It don't matter. Till this year. Too soon? Yeah, probably too soon. He's sitting there, listen. I mean, if I was Jairus, I'm like, hey, woman, I don't care if it's coming out of your ears. Stop it. I need him at my house right now. Enough. You've already had medical care. You've seen doctors. I can't help if your HMO ain't working for you, but I need Jesus, right? But you didn't hear any of that. You didn't see any of that. Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe. If we could just stop. See, to me, that's what faith is all about. Faith is not letting fear and time constraints rule you. I used to have a friend, he said he used to say this all the time when he'd get in predicaments, and man, this guy used to get himself in some. And he would always say, Jesus, how are you going to get us out of this? His timing is what's important. The third lesson from Jairus is this. Jairus was astonished. By the way, after we went through 7 doctors, we took my son back to his allergist for just a regular checkup. It wasn't to check anything else. We'd given up on trying to figure out the migraines. And so we're at the allergist, and the allergist starts talking to Tyler. He says, you still having those headaches? Tyler goes, yeah. So he begins to feel along his jawline. He goes, Tyler, clench your teeth together. And so he did. And he goes, oh, yeah. You got TMJ. We're like, what? Like, yeah. You probably need to make sure you go to your dentist and have them check it. And I said, yeah, we've already been there, and they didn't check it. His headaches, his migraines, he grinds his teeth at night, so we had to go get him a mouth guard. This is how bad it is. There's been times that my son, I'm very afraid of what he does in his sleep, because there's been times when I've gone down there and his mouthpiece is like across the room. What are you doing? How violent are you getting in your sleep, son? You know, there's been times that he has knocked over the lamp right next to his bed. You know what I mean? Like we walk in his room, and his room is just, it's hard to tell that it's a mess. But I mean, there's new messes. The lamp knocked over, she's like, man, like, is Freddy chasing you in your dreams? What's going on here, right? And so that helped. He did some other things that kind of changed, and every now and then he'll have one, but it was all about God's timing. I wanted it now, here and now, right? This is my child. No parent wants their child to suffer. You hate it when your child suffers. And we live in a world, I'm part of this world too. I mean, we live in a world where we don't want our kids to experience any kind of pain. We don't, right? I don't. But I experienced pain growing up. My mom couldn't stop it. Astonished. Mark chapter 5, verse 41. So here's the conclusion of the story. So Jesus walks in. He took this girl by the hand, right? Jesus, right off the bat, begins to hold her. Took her by the hand, and he said to her, Talitha Koum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. In the NIV, it gives her age. It says she was 12 years old. I don't know why that's important, but evidently it is because it's in there, right? She was 12 years old. And it says, at this, they were completely astonished. Wow. God, what are you going to do? How are you going to take care of this? Some of you know, a couple weeks ago, I was in Neosho. I was doing a revival there, and I got up Monday night to preach, and I was preaching. I started to preach, and I got stuck on a word. Like I couldn't say, I don't know, theology, grace, those two words. I couldn't say those words. Like I would go to say them, and a different word would come out, and then I couldn't even pronounce the words. And my tongue started tingling, and I felt really lightheaded, and I looked at the pastor, and I said, I don't think I'm doing so good. I said, I need a break. I need 5 minutes. He said, okay. So I kind of walked out to the back of the, outside of the sanctuary, under the foyer, and there was the associate pastor was standing there, and he looked at me, and he's like, he goes, you don't look good at all. And then another guy came out. You know, when you don't feel good and you're wondering, well, what's going on? And then when people start telling you what they think it is, that only makes it worse, right? So some guy comes out and goes, you could be having a stroke, maybe. I'm like, oh, great. Right. I said, all right, well, maybe we should go to the hospital. So we go to the hospital. I'm thinking, of all the times, really, God, this is what we're going to do, right? I'm trying to get through revival. I'm trying to preach. I'm trying to do something you want me to do. At least I thought you did. Maybe you don't want me preaching. I walked in the emergency room. My blood pressure was 220 over 107. Yeah. Half of my face was white, and the other half was beet red. It was weird. I don't know what was going on there. So they take me back. They run all these tests, and they think I'm going to, if I didn't have a stroke, they thought I was going to have one. And so probably within 20 minutes, my blood pressure dropped almost back down to normal on its own. They didn't give me medicine or anything. I was just sitting there going, God, why? What's going on? So I had to call my wife. You know, my wife's 5 hours away. I got to tell her what's going on. Come to find out, this medicine that I was taking, I found out that my thyroid is really slow, and so some medicine that I was taking mixed with the thyroid really slowed everything down, and so it was my body's reaction to get everything back up again. So my blood pressure was going way high because everything else was going way low. So now I'm on thyroid medicine. I asked the doctor, I said, so this will like speed up my metabolism? Oh yeah. He goes, weight loss will be easier now. I'm like, I'm going to have a Big Mac. He goes, no. I was just thinking things could have been a whole lot worse. Things could have been crazy. And I saw how God worked and moved into that whole situation. There's a lot of things going on leading up to that moment that I couldn't understand health-wise. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Man, I was just feeling bad. And man, thank goodness I was at a church where, I knew the pastor really well. And I knew a lot of the people there extremely well. They're my friends. And I could have been someplace where I didn't know anybody. And how God took care of that situation that was horrible, could have been worse. And in the middle of that, instead of complaining and saying, God, why? I was just astonished at how God works. My blood pressure is good, by the way. I'm not going to. It's really good. Just checked it the other day. It's really, really good. I'm good. I ran 4 miles this morning, okay? I'm good. Astonished. See, a lot of times I don't think we get astonished because I think we credit what happens to other people. Right? Well, the doctor came up with the medicine. He got it right at the right time. Yeah. You guys have some stories within this church, right? I'm not telling you anything. Some things that have happened, you're just like, wow, that has to be God. And to be astonished at what God does. Astonished. There's a lady in our church, her name was Brenda. And matter of fact, I just saw Brenda Saturday night before I left. Friday night. And Brenda's been at her church for a long time. Her son is a Nazarene pastor on the Missouri district. And several years ago now, she was diagnosed with cancer. And I remember when she was diagnosed with it, the doctor said, you will always have cancer in your body. They thought they could control it, but they really feel like it's just, it seems like when they do, it goes away, it pops back up. And they just told her, you're just going to deal with this. This is what's going to happen in your life, the rest of your life. And so they did a scan and said, yeah, it looks like it's popped up at a couple of these different places. We're going to take some time and we're going to do some tests and then we'll just figure out what we're going to do as far as treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, whatever. So this was probably 2 months ago. And so it was a Sunday afternoon, unusual Sunday afternoon. I was home, and my Chin's cell phone rang, and she came in the other room. She said, that was Brenda. She said, they're meeting up at the church at 5 o'clock, and she wants us to come and pray with her. I said, okay. So we went up there. There was probably 10 people in the room, and there's a couple of her family members who are not believers, not followers of Christ. They were there. And everybody said, she let different people say, what they wanted to encourage her, read scripture or what have you, which I thought was good. But then at the end, Brenda just stood up and she said, I know that this is what's going to happen. I know that when I go back, that they're not going to find any of this cancer. It's going to be gone. Like they're not going to be able to find it. I know this. We've all been in those situations, right? Maybe most of us have been in those moments where you're like, oh, well, stiff upper lip. Let's just take a positive approach to this. Matter of fact, there are times I think we catch ourselves when we're praying. We pray, but we want to pray realistically. We put qualifiers in our prayers. But Lord, if... Brenda she didn't have any qualifiers in her prayer. She believed this. So we gathered around her, 10 of us. Several people prayed out loud. I walked out of there and I go, wow, I didn't realize, it was this bad. That her last checkup was this bad. But we said we'd pray for her, so we consistently did as a family. I think it was 2 weeks after that. She went back to the doctor, and she had been telling the doctor, by the way, the whole time, you're not going to find it when I come back. And he said, Brenda, she said, no, you're not going to find it. And she said, matter of fact, when you don't find it, she said, you will owe me an apology and God an apology. That's some intestinal fortitude, isn't it? I like that. That's gutsy. I like that. She went back, they ran the test, and the doctor came in, and he said, I don't know where it's at. It's not there. He says, it's just not there. Astonished. I want to be astonished. I talk to missionaries, and I run into them quite a bit as I travel. And I ask them, I said, I hear consistently from missionaries how things in the United States are different than they are on the mission field. I said, well, what is that? Well, why is that? I said, are we serving two different gods here? What's going on? why is it just blowing up and all these things? And I've had several missionaries tell me, say, you know what? Here's the deal. We see healings and powerful moves of the Holy Spirit, for whatever reason, just don't seem to happen over here like it does over there. I think that's what I'm missing. I think that's what the church in general in America is missing is astonishment. To be astonished again, and not just at a single moment and place and time, but I think God wants to consistently astonish us. Not just every once in a while to remind us that he's here and he can do anything, but I think consistently God wants to do some amazing, astonishing things. So here's what I want to do tonight. I talked with Pastor about this. I want to ask, is it James, the acoustic guitar player, Jim? Is that right? Yeah. Could you come up? Would you mind playing maybe that last song that you guys just did on the guitar for me? Would you do that? I want to close the service with giving you guys an opportunity to be anointed with oil. I'm going to ask Pastor Bill to come, and I'm going to ask Dennis to come on up here. We believe in anointing. In the scriptures, in the New Testament, it says that this is what they would do. They would take oil and they would touch it on someone, on a person's head or on their body, and then they would pray over them. The scriptures say the elders of the church, we adhere to that. We believe that in our church, in our denomination. I'm not saying that anybody can't anoint anybody. I believe anybody can. But here's what I want to tell you. I know this. Let me share this personal story with you. And maybe this will sound like a qualifier to you, and I hope it doesn't. I just want to share this with you, okay? I guess it's been now 3 years ago that my oldest sister died of cancer. And I remember shortly before she died, we were together. We were driving somewhere, and she, in that conversation, asked me to do her funeral. And then she asked me this. She said, Jim, can God heal me? Do you believe God will heal me? And I just looked at her. I said, well, Kim, I said, there's two answers. I said, there's a Sunday school answer that I can give you. I said, or I can just hit you with the truth. What do you want? She said, I want the truth. I said, okay. I believe that God does heal people. I've heard of them. I've seen those moments. But I also know this, that there is an ultimate healing that we believe in. And so if he heals you on this side of heaven, it's up to him. That's his decision, not mine. And I believe we can pray for it. But I reassured her. I told her, I said, but if he doesn't, I know this. You'll be healed on the other side. Cancer won't be able to take you twice. And I think a lot of times we focus on the physical, and I don't have any problem with that. I'm okay with that. I think that's biblical, that's scriptural. But then I think there are times that we don't really look at the emotional or the spiritual healing that I believe God does as well. Amen? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask Pastor Bill to come over here, and Pastor Dennis, if you stand right there, and we'll have the oil with us. I just want to ask you, I'm going to have you guys face the crowd. I want you to stand where you're at tonight. I want you to bow your heads. In just a moment, I'm going to turn my microphone off, guys. As he's playing in the guitar just in the background, I want to encourage you to give you an opportunity tonight to be healed. You got two of your pastors of your church that are here that are willing to pray with you, willing to anoint you with oil. Pray for God's divine intervention, whatever the case is, whatever the situation is. So I'm going to ask you guys just to spread out a little bit further. If you guys go to the ends of the stage a little bit, give everybody a little bit more space. That way if somebody comes down that aisle or that aisle. So with your heads bowed, your eyes closed, If you want to be anointed tonight, if you want one of the pastors, I'll pray with you as well. Just come. They'll anoint you. They'll pray for you. And then I'll close in prayer tonight, all right? Bow your heads.